She had been missing only a few hours when the first messages started spreading through her friends' phones. Alexis Sharkey wasn't answering calls, she hadn't come home, and the last people who had seen her said she left her apartment after an argument, walking out into the warm Houston night without her car, purse, or anything else she normally carried. It wasn't enough to declare an emergency, but it was enough to raise fear. Alexis rarely disappeared from anyone's radar. Silence wasn't normal. By the next morning, she still hadn't surfaced. Her friends pushed harder, calling hospitals, checking social media, and retracing her last known movements. Rumors grew as hours passed without activity from her phone. Some of her closest friends said she had been terrified in the weeks before she vanished, describing fights at home and saying she felt controlled and isolated. She had talked about wanting to leave, but leaving was never simple when the person she feared lived in the same home. Her mother tried to reach her repeatedly, calling through the night, waiting for the familiar sound of her daughter's voice. Each unanswered ring deepened the sense that something in her world had gone suddenly, violently wrong. While friends searched, a sanitation worker doing his route along a quiet West Houston service road spotted something at the edge of a thicket. At first, he thought it was a mannequin. The position seemed too deliberate, the body lying cleanly on the ground without debris around it. When he got closer, he realized it was a young woman, nude, face down, her hair partially covering her back. He stepped away and called 911, his voice shaking as he described what he had found. Police arrived within minutes and taped off the area while detectives surveyed the position of the body, noting how carefully she appeared to have been placed. There were no obvious gunshot wounds, no stab marks, and no signs of a struggle around the site. Investigators could see small abrasions on her body, but nothing that explained how she died. Whoever left her there had placed her deliberately, without dragging, without leaving footprints or tire tracks that could be easily followed. The site offered almost nothing. It looked staged, as if someone hoped the elements would erase any trace of what happened before morning traffic picked up. Fingerprint confirmation identified her quickly. Alexis Sharkey, 26 years old, recently married, and known among her friends for always answering messages within minutes. Detectives notified her family and brought her friends in for interviews. What they heard formed a pattern. People close to Alexis described her recent fear, the arguments at home, the pressure she said she felt every day. She had been trying to plan a separation quietly, hoping she could leave without confrontation. One friend recalled Alexis saying she no longer recognized the person she lived with. Police interviewed her husband, Tom Sharkey, who told them she had left after a disagreement and never returned. He insisted their marriage had ordinary problems and denied harming her. Detectives noted his shifting explanations and the lack of urgency in his calls the night she went missing. They also noted the absence of defensive wounds on her body, suggesting she may have been overpowered quickly or caught off guard somewhere she felt too tired to resist. While waiting on autopsy results, investigators pulled digital records. Alexis's phone had stopped transmitting shortly after she left the apartment. Security cameras around the complex showed no footage of her walking away. There was no evidence she had traveled far from the building. Detectives believed she never made it more than a short distance from where she lived. They began examining vehicles connected to her household, looking at mileage, timing, and possible routes leading to the service road where she was found. When the medical examiner completed the report, the cause of death became undeniable: strangulation. Internal injuries in her neck showed force strong enough to collapse her airway. The abrasions on her body were consistent with being handled, not dragged or assaulted with a weapon. She had died face to face with someone, and her body had been transported after death. Her death was ruled a homicide within hours of the findings being released. Detectives built a timeline around the night she vanished, pulling location pings, text messages, and statements from neighbors. Everything pointed back to the apartment. Witnesses heard raised voices earlier in the evening. No one reported seeing her leave the complex. The placement of her body miles away indicated someone had used a vehicle and chosen a spot easy to access but just hidden enough to avoid immediate detection. Investigators believed the killer knew the area and understood how early morning sanitation routes worked. As the investigation expanded, detectives uncovered prior domestic violence allegations involving Tom from earlier relationships. They located messages in which Alexis confided fear, telling friends she felt monitored and verbally attacked. She had told multiple people she planned to leave him soon. Detectives knew that the period just before separation often triggers the most dangerous escalation. The timeline, digital evidence, and behavioral patterns aligned with that risk. Months passed as police continued interviewing witnesses and assembling a case. By fall of 2021, they presented their findings to a judge and secured a warrant for Tom's arrest for Alexis's murder. Detectives tracked him to Florida, staying with a relative. They coordinated with local authorities, moving in to take him into custody. Before officers could reach him, Tom went into a bathroom with a gun and shot himself. He died moments before deputies breached the door. With his death, the criminal case could not proceed, but the investigation's conclusions remained. The evidence pointed to a domestic dispute turned fatal, a young woman strangled during an argument and transported to a roadside where her killer attempted to hide the truth. Investigators briefed her family in detail, explaining each step of the reconstruction. There would be no trial, no cross-examination, no confession from the only person who could answer their questions. Friends and family held memorials in Houston and Pennsylvania. Many returned to the service road where she was found, leaving flowers and notes in the grass. They spoke openly about the signs they had seen, the messages she had sent, and the hope that her story might push others to seek help before violence escalates. Her mother continued speaking with reporters, reminding people that Alexis had tried to leave quietly and safely, but never got the chance. Domestic violence does not always reveal itself in the beginning. It grows in arguments that become threats, in isolation that becomes control, and in fear that becomes routine. Alexis had been trying to navigate that reality, believing she could slip away without confrontation. But the moment she tried to reclaim her independence was the moment her danger peaked. Her case became another reminder that homicide in intimate relationships is rarely sudden. It builds through patterns that friends often see but don't fully understand until it's too late. For Alexis, those warnings surfaced in her final weeks, but the intervention she needed came after she was already gone. Thank you for listening to Homicide Files. Subscribe for more true crime stories.